Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. Today is episode 6 of Ansible Zero to Hero series. This is a 14 episode series and till now we have completed 5 episodes in this series, starting with episode 1 where we learned about the basics of Ansible and getting started with it. Then in episode 2 we learned about Ansible ad hoc commands. Along with that, we also learned about passwordless authentication, inventory file in Ansible. In episode 3, we learned how to write our very first Ansible playbook. Along with that, we also learned about the basics of YAML. So how to write simple YAML files, what are the data types that are available in YAML and how to use them. In episode 4, we started our journey with Ansible roles. So I've explained the folder structure of Ansible roles. What is the difference between Ansible playbooks, ad hoc commands, and Ansible roles? We also learned how to write a simple Ansible role. We have done a hands-on in episode 4. Episode 5 is basically an extension of episode 4 because in episode 5, we deep dived into the Ansible roles where we learned how to use Ansible Galaxy to use the pre-built Ansible roles or existing Ansible roles from the Ansible Galaxy. We have also done a demo where I have shown how to install Docker on EC2 instances using Ansible, where we have used the Docker role from Ansible Galaxy from a particular user namespace. So this was the first 5 episodes of this series. Today is episode 6, where we will learn about Ansible variables and precedence of Ansible variables. Now I'll not directly jump into Ansible variables, but we will start with an example. What I'll do is I will explain how to create AWS resources such as EC2 instance or S3 bucket using Ansible. So we will be using the Ansible AWS collection for this. And once we write this Ansible role, we will learn how using variables, we can improvise the project that we have written in step 1. So we can see the real use case of Ansible variables. We'll also learn about Jinja to templating, which is a standard of using the variables in Ansible. Finally, we will talk about Ansible variable precedence. Basically in Ansible, you have multiple places where you can declare the variables. So what is the order of priority? That is what we will learn in variable precedence part. For the people who are new, complete notes will be provided in the same GitHub repository. So you have day-wise folder structure. If you go to any of these folders, you can find the files which will have the playbook.yaml files or the theory part. Everything will be shared through the folder-wise in the GitHub repository. So you can start this repository, fork it to get the updates. Okay, now let's jump into the video and start understanding how to create AWS resources or in general, any of the third-party resources using Ansible. So till now, what we have done is we have used Ansible, right? So on the control node, which is our laptop, till now what we have done is we have installed Ansible and we were using the managed nodes. So the managed nodes were on AWS. So we were using EC2 instances. So we connected to these EC2 instances using the passwordless authentication. And we were creating the HTTPD packages or we were installing Docker, something like that. So what were we doing till now? We were using Ansible to connect to this EC2 instances through SSH protocol or passwordless authentication protocol. And the playbook or the roles that you are writing, they were installing a module on the EC2 instance, right? Whatever the code that you are writing, whatever the YAML files that you are writing. Let's say you are writing a YAML file which will do something like apt install docker, anything. So after connecting to this EC2 instances through the passwordless way, Ansible installs a module on this EC2 instances, and the module is executed because there is Python that is already installed on this manage nodes. So this is what we were doing. But now let's say there is a use case where using Ansible. So on the control node, we have Ansible, and what you want to do is, instead of talking to your virtual machines, you actually want to talk to the APIs. So now my use case is to talk to the API of AWS and create some resources on AWS. It can be EC2, it can be S3 bucket, and not just AWS. It can be Azure, it can be GCP, or it can be any network appliances like Cisco. How will you tackle this situation? Because in the scenario number 1, you have a virtual machine. You can connect with passwordless authentication, install a module, and module gets executed and create resources here. But now we want to talk through the API. So for this purpose, what you can do in Ansible is, I mean, you don't have to do anything, but when you use the Ansible AWS modules, or when you use Ansible Cisco modules, or when you use Ansible Azure modules. So what Ansible does is Ansible installs the module on your control node or on your local host. Okay, it doesn't connect to the appliances or AWS or anything through the passwordless authentication, but instead it installs the module on the same machine on the control node, and when this module is executed, it will talk to the API. Because end of the day, what is this module? It is basically a Python code which Ansible executes. So Ansible runs the Python code on your local machine, and this Python code talks to the APIs of AWS or talks to the APIs of Cisco or Azure, GCP, whatever it is, where we will come to know about these things. What are the supported things in Ansible? So there is a concept in Ansible called as collections. In the previous classes, I have explained that we will come back to the concept called collection. So if you go to the Ansible documentation, you have these collections. So you have collection for OpenStack, you have collection for NetApp, which is a storage related thing. You have collection for Kubernetes, you have collection for Infoblocks, Grafana, Google namespace, which is your GKE, GCP. You have F5 networks for the big IP. Let's say if you go to this one. So F5 has a network appliance, right? If you go to this documentation, so F5 provides a collection, and using these modules, you are not doing anything. You will do the same thing as a user. Step 1 and step 2 is exactly same for you. You are not doing anything different. You are only providing YAML as an input for your Ansible. So as a user, your steps are the same. You write a YAML file either in the format of playbook or in the format of role. But how Ansible talks to these things is different. When you want to use Ansible built-in roles, I mean the built-in modules, such as apt or yum or the file module, whatever we learned till now, or the built-in modules where they directly SSH to the target virtual machine to the managed nodes and execute the modules on them. Here, when you're using the collections like AWS, Cisco, or Azure, they will not be SSHing to AWS because it's not possible, right? When you want to create resources on AWS, you cannot SSH to the AWS platform because it is not supported. All that you can do is talk to the AWS using API. So as a user, you will write the same YAML file and Ansible executes the module on your control node and talk to the API of AWS. Of course, you need to provide the password authentication for the API, which we will learn in the next steps. For now, this is what we do. And if you want to understand what are the things that are supported, you will go to the Ansible documentation and see, okay, Ansible supports IBM, Ansible supports Google, Grafana, Kubernetes, NetApp, OpenStack, and etc. Now the next question is, Abhishek, just like pre-built modules, right? These are the pre-built Ansible modules, which are nothing but if you go to Ansible built-in, you can see all that we were using like the apt module, copy module, or the file module. These modules are directly available in the Ansible installation, right? What we did in the last class, if you go to, so in the first playbook that we have written, so what did we do? We wrote a role and inside the HTTP role in the task, so we are directly using these modules, right? The Ansible built-in apt or built-in copy. We were not doing any installation. We are directly using them. But when it comes to the collections like AWS, what is a collection? Anything apart from the Ansible built-in modules, like the apt module or copy module, cron module, file module. Apart from that, if you want to talk to any third parties like AWS or Azure or Google, so Ansible has a concept called collection. So this collection is basically a combination of roles, modules, anything that is related to that third party tool. If you go to the AWS collection, okay, it is called as Amazon collection. So just go to collections in Amazon namespace, click on that. And you will find the module for EC2. Just search for EC2. Okay, these are the modules related to EC2. Similarly, you have modules for IAM. You have modules for S3, RDS, Route 53. Mostly everything that is present on AWS. To use these modules, okay, for pre-built modules or the built-in modules, we are directly using them. But to use them, the AWS one, what you have to do is first install this collection. That's the only step. And to install the AWS collection, in the Day-06 folder, I have already provided the step. So if you go to the Day-06 folder, so this is the step that you need to do. Ansible Galaxy collection install Amazon AWS. Abhishek, how did you find this command? Again, it's very simple. Just go to Ansible Galaxy. Okay. In the Ansible Galaxy, similarly, just like we have roles, we have a section called collections. Go to the namespaces of collections. And here you can search for Amazon. And when you search for Amazon, you have the AWS thing. You have the documentation, which is same in the Ansible official documentation. And you have the install command. So this is the same thing I have copied from here and I have put that in the MD file. So our first step is to install this. Okay, I'll take my terminal here. You can use any of your terminal. I'm just using the Visual Studio terminal only. It says I already have it. And if I want to force with the latest version, I can just do force. In your case also, you might have it in the Ansible installation. You might get some collections. Otherwise, use this command to install the AWS collection. Okay, because I have forced the installation, it has installed it one more time. And one more thing to understand is for certain collections, you might have some prerequisites. You will find them in the documentation. For AWS collection, one is you have to install the collection itself, and second, on your laptop or on your control node. Because I said on the Ansible control node, the module is executed and the module talks to the AWS API. If you know Python, you know that in Python, there is a module called Boto3, which is quite popular. We have learned in the AWS series as well. This is the module which Ansible use to talk to the API of AWS. So on your control node, you should also have Boto3 installed. So this is again a prerequisite. If you don't have Boto3, the execution will fail because Ansible cannot talk to the AWS APIs. So what I'll do is I'll just run pip install Boto3. A point to remember here, if you are on different operating system or if you're on a different architecture, this command might change, and sometimes you might have to use pipx or you might have to use pip3 depending upon your Python installation. But at this point of time, just make sure Boto3 is installed successfully. Okay, in my machine, I've just installed. It is already available, so it says requirements already satisfied and Boto3 is available. So I'm done with two things. I have Boto3 installed. I also have the AWS collection available. Now I'm ready to use any of these AWS modules. Till now, what I've done is I've just set the platform to use any of these modules in my Ansible playbooks. Now let's get started with writing the creation of EC2 instance. So you have this module, EC2 instance module. You can read through this if you want, because there are a lot of parameters that you can pass, right? What I'll do is I'll just take one of the examples. So this is one example which says start an instance with public IP address. Or if you want, you can pick up any other examples as well. You can pick up the example from my documentation also. So even I have provided a documentation example here. So we will be using this. Just copy this one, go to your Visual Studio Code. Don't worry, I'm going to explain each and every line that is available there. So first we'll create a folder. Let's call this as EC2 creation, or just call it as EC2, that's fine. And inside this, first I'll create a file. Let me call this as ec2.yaml or ec2 underscore create.yaml. Of course, I need an inventory file, because without the inventory file, Ansible does not understand where it has to execute these things. In this case, of course, if you go to the example here, Ansible is actually executing on the control node itself. So there are no manage nodes. So you ideally don't have to provide your manage nodes, because you're talking to the AWS API and the module is executing on your control node. But it's a good practice that you always maintain your inventory file. So I'll just use the same inventory file that I have previously, because I haven't changed any of my control nodes. I'll be using the same things. Let me paste it here. So I have this thing. One is the app, one is the DB. I have just two EC2 instances. Now let's try to understand what is written here. Now I haven't jumped to the concept of variables yet, because first I want you to understand what kind of Ansible playbooks you will write and how you will variabilize those Ansible playbooks. What is the advantage of using Ansible variables? Before that, we need to see a Ansible playbook itself. So first, I'm saying the host as local host. Let's try to compare with the previous thing that we have written. So previously we have written host as all, but here I have written host as local host. What is the difference? The same thing that I have explained. Here we are running on all the EC2 instances, connecting to them with the passwordless authentication, but here I'm running on the same machine. So my host will be local host. Connection local. This tells Ansible that, okay, the playbook has to be executed on the same machine. So this is something that you have to definitely write. Now you can either write the task here, or as we were doing previously, what you can do is you can define roles, and in the roles you can define a role. Let me call this role as EC2, and using Ansible Galaxy. So Ansible Galaxy role init EC2. So it has created a role called EC2, and you must have seen in the previous classes, it creates a bunch of files and folders for us. So if you go to the my bad, I'm in the wrong folder structure. Let me, we need to do that again. So we will go to EC2 and we will run the command again. Ansible Galaxy role initialization EC2. And you can see the folder is created for EC2, where you have the complete folder structure that I have explained in the previous classes. You have defaults, files, handlers, meta, tasks, templates, tests, and vars. Okay, Abhishek, we have the role that is available now. In the role, go to the task, go to the main.yaml and paste what you have copied. So you can remove the task section and align this entire thing. Okay, I just have one task, and the task is to start a EC2 instance with public IP address. Now, Abhishek, when I'm dealing with AWS, okay, you have mentioned that I need to talk to the AWS APIs. But when I have to talk to the AWS APIs, I need to use my API keys. In the AWS world, we will be using the AWS access key and the secret ID, right? Which we will get for IAM user. How do we secure this? I cannot directly put them in the Ansible playbooks, right? If I'm using a EC2 instance creation logic, I need to pass the access key and I need to pass the secret key. But if I directly put them in the Ansible playbook, anybody who is watching this Ansible playbook, or when we actually check this into a GitHub repository, the secret key and the access key are compromised. So there is a security issue. How do we solve this? So Ansible has a built-in Vault integration. What is Vault? Vault is basically like a security thing where you can secure your variables, you can secure your passwords, you can secure your API tokens, right? So Ansible has a built-in Vault integration, which is called as Ansible Vault. So what we are going to do next is, before executing this, okay, I've taken this entire example from the Ansible documentation. I know what are the things that are required for the EC2 instance creation. I need the instance type, I need the security group, I need the region, I need the image ID. Tags is not mandatory. I can just remove this as well. And I need the access key and the secret key. Now, how do we secure this? I have steps for that as well. They are very, very simple steps. In other tools like Terraform or Jenkins, you might have to perform the installation of Vault, but Ansible comes with the predefined installation. You just need to execute two commands. One is you create a password for accessing the sensitive information that you put in Vault, just like you put any of your secret documents or any of your assets in a vault, in a real vault, you will have a password for that vault, right? Similarly, even for the Ansible Vault, first we will create a password. I'm using OpenSSL for creating a random base64 encoded password. If you want to use, you can also use a secure one with a very good encryption. But for the demo, let's use this. So we will be first creating a base64 encoded password that is stored in the file called vault.pass. And this is the command for basically creating the passwords in the vault. What is this command doing? Ansible Vault. This is not edit. Actually, first you need to use create. Ansible Vault create. So I'm creating a file which has the password, and I am accessing the file with the vault password. Okay, the vault password that we have created in the previous step. Very simple, just like you use a real vault or real safe for securing your assets, you have a password for that vault. Similarly, in the Ansible Vault also, you can create any files, and it is better to secure that file that you are creating with a password. So first I'm creating that. And here it is asking, okay, do you want to add anything to the file, that is to the vault? Yes, I want to add. What I want to add? I want to add two things. One is AWS access key. Second one that I want to add is AWS secret key. And what are the values for this? So this is my AWS console, and you have this section called security credentials. You can use the root IAM user. You can use any IAM user that you want. But in general, in the organization, you will not be using the root IAM user. You will be using your own IAM user dedicated to Ansible with the permissions that it required to have. But for the purpose of demo, I will show you. Let me create a access key here. Copy the access key, paste it here. Secret key, let me pause the video because it will have some sensitive information. Okay, I have added that to the Ansible Vault and I have saved the file using :wq exclamatory. I have saved the file. Now, what will happen after this is using the Jinja 2 templating. I'll explain the Jinja 2 templating again when I explain about variables. I'll be talking about variables after this because I'm going to show how to improvise this playbook. For now, whenever you see this kind of double curly brackets, inside the double curly brackets, if you place anything, that means Ansible will understand, okay, Abhishek wants to reference some variable. How do you read a variable from Ansible Vault? It's very simple. You don't have to do anything. Whenever you store a variable in Ansible Vault, you can directly access them, put double quotes, and within the double quotes, just put the variable that is in your Ansible Vault. So I have my EC2 access key and secret key in the vault. So now let's see by executing this playbook. So how will we execute it? We will just say Ansible playbook, and then I will just run the command -i inventory. Of course, inventory file, you don't have to pass any of your managed nodes, but just let's pass the inventory file and ec2 create.yaml. This will fail. Let's see why. So it said attempting to decrypt, but no vault secrets found. This is what I have explained, right? You put the secrets in the Ansible vault and you have secured this vault with a password, right? You have secured this vault with a base64 encoded password. In real time, in production scenarios, you will not be using base64 encoded password. You will be using a encryption mechanism. You can be using SHA-1, SHA-256, anything that your organization recommends. Now, when you are executing the Ansible playbook, Ansible will try to read the passwords from Ansible Vault. And when it tries to read the password from the vault, it is secured with a base64 encoded password in our case. Ansible need to know how to decrypt it and what is the password. So what you need to do is you need to pass the vault file. When you pass this vault file, Ansible will understand, okay, how can I decrypt it? So let's pass that. For that, we will just run the same command, but this time Ansible playbook with vault password file vault.pass. Now let's execute this. Okay, create ec2.yaml does not exist. Let's see if we are in the right file. It's ec2 underscore create.yaml. ec2 underscore create.yaml. Okay, it failed. Let's see why it failed and we can debug it. So it said there is some syntax problem in line 3, column 3. Let's go to the task main.yaml. It said there is some syntax issue. Let's see what is that syntax issue. Okay, this looks good. We can just remove this for the purpose of clarity. Okay, we have the name as Ansible instance. This looks good. Here also it looks good. Let's try it one more time to see. We can use Ansible linting, but I just want to understand what is going wrong and try to explain. Okay, it says ec2 underscore access key is underdefined from vault as defined. Okay, let me see if I have done something wrong. ec2 underscore access underscore key is not defined. So this is my vault file. Do I have? Yeah. So I actually need to update this ec2 access key. My bad. I have put this one. Perfect. Now I have edited the vault thing and let me execute one more time. Okay, not this. Ansible playbook command. Okay, the first step is always gather facts. And now the second step is it is trying to install the EC2. Perfect. It said two tasks were executed. One is the gather facts and other is EC2 instance creation. It said it changed one. Let's go to my AWS console. We should see a EC2 instance getting created. Let's go to EC2. We should be in the US East 1 region. Yes, we are in the US East 1 and one instance is running. See, it's still initializing because it is something that we have just created and it got created with the public IP. Intentionally, I did not pass a key value pair. If you want, you can pass the key value pair, but I don't want to connect to this instance. I'll delete it immediately. So I did not bother creating a key value pair. Perfect. So now we learned how to use collections. Till now, I did not talk about variables, but what did we learn till now? So till this point of time, we learned how to use collections in Ansible. This is a very important concept because Ansible built-in modules can help you to some extent for automating your regular tasks. But when you want to use Ansible for infrastructure provisioning, like creating resources on AWS, or when you want to use Ansible for network automation, we have a dedicated class for network automation. Again, we might repeat some of these things, but for provisioning of infrastructure or network automation, you need the concept like collections, because either the network appliances or the PaaS platforms, SaaS platforms, IaaS platforms like AWS, they need to be interacted through the APIs and to talk to the APIs of them. So Ansible provides collections, and these collections will have roles, modules, and other things where they get executed on your control node. The built-in modules, they get executed, they get installed on the manage nodes as modules, and on your manage node you will have Python and they get executed. It can be the copy module, or it can be the shell module, or it can be the apt module. They are running directly on your manage node. But the infrastructure provisioning or network automation, they run on your control node and they talk to the APIs of AWS or Cisco or F5, any of these things, because you cannot directly talk to them through the SSH. They will not have the protocols like SSH. You cannot connect to the AWS console through the SSH protocol. You cannot connect to F5 through the SSH protocol. That's why the only medium is to talk through the APIs. Perfect. So we learned how to install collection. Once we install the collection, it is again important to understand each collection can have prerequisites. In case of AWS, we saw the prerequisites were installation of Boto 3. We saw the prerequisite was installation of AWS collection, only the 2 steps. Of course, you need to use the Vault for securing your AWS access key and secret key. So these were the steps that we have done till now. Now the question is, Abhishek, everything is perfect. Why do I need variables? Because right now what I've done, I have created an EC2 instance and I can share this playbook with anyone and they can also create an EC2 instance. But just like any programming language, if you observe the Ansible playbook that you have written, if you watch the playbook that you have written very carefully, all of the things or most of the things here are hard coded. So what happens because of this is, if you share this playbook with anyone else, whenever they create the EC2 instance, they will get the same image ID. I mean, they will be using the same Ubuntu again and again. What if you want to share this Ansible playbook with someone and they don't want Ubuntu? They might be, their requirement is Windows or their requirement is CentOS. Just like that, you might share this with someone else and they don't want T2 micro. They might want T2 medium or T2 extra large. So hard coding, not just in Ansible, but in any programming language, is a bad practice. Either you're writing shell scripting, Python, Ansible, you should not be hard coding any of these things. So if you hard code, what happens? Your playbook is restricted to a particular thing only. Whereas if you variabilize this, you can share this with anyone and they can, instead of using T2 micro, they can use anything else. How do you do that in Ansible? The concept is same, just like any programming language, you will be using variables. But one complexity in the case of Ansible, yes, you will use variables, but there are multiple places. In fact, the complexity comes into picture because if you go to Ansible documentation, there are 22 places, if I'm right. Yeah. So there are 22 places in which you can declare variables in Ansible. I think even in my experience, Ansible is the one where you have multiple places to declare the variables, and 22 is actually very complicated. And to be honest, I think this is something that Ansible can improve. Of course, Ansible says that it is for the purpose of flexibility. It is for the purpose of allowing the users to use variables according to their use cases. But personally, I feel that Ansible makes it complicated by allowing users to declare variables at multiple places. Anything at this point of time, you cannot do anything. You have variables that you can declare in multiple places. We will see what are the most common places and what happens if you declare variables in, if we go back, what happens if you declare as role default, what happens if you declare as extra var, which has priority than the other things. First, let's start with the simple one. As we learned in the last class, I have explained you can declare the variables when you create a role in the folder structure. You have a folder for defaults, and in the defaults I said you can just declare anything here. Now in the main.yaml, let's variabilize the instance type. So what I'll be doing in the defaults main.yaml, I can just come here. I can say, let me just say type, and you can provide a value here. So what will be the value? I'll say t2.micro. And in this file, we can reference that variable and we can say, so this is the Jinja 2 templating standard, how you will use the variable. So two steps, right? In any programming language, you will be doing two steps for a variable. One is you define or declare a variable. That's what we did here. So here we define and declare the variable. Second is you use the variable. And to use a variable in Ansible, you will be using the Jinja 2 templating standard, where two curly braces, open close two curly braces, and within that you need to write type. Okay. So now what happens is it is exactly same, but instead of hard coding it, we are referencing the variable. Let's close the other files to make it easy. Yeah. So I am referencing the variable from the defaults main.yaml. How will Ansible know that, okay, Abhishek has put something in the defaults main.yaml? You don't have to worry about it. Ansible will load the variable from default mains.yaml or vars main.yaml in any of these 22 places. Just like defaults var.yaml, main.yaml, vars main.yaml, and in other places that I'm going to explain. In any of these places, you can define and declare a variable. Ansible is going to load it. You don't have to do anything extra. So it's Ansible's task. Now let's see if there is any change. Okay, I've just variabilized this playbook. Let me see if I run this again. Okay, it said instance type, and there is some typo here. So let's just put the double quote. Perfect. And let's run it again. Okay, so it said gathering facts, and it said there is some syntax problem. Error type is undefined. Okay, let's see if there is any mistake. Let's go to the default main.yaml. I have provided type. I hope I have defined it inside defaults main.yaml. Perfect. And here inside the EC2. Inside the defaults, inside the main.yaml, I have type as T2 micro, and within the task main.yaml, I'm using the type. So it's all good. Let me run it one more time. Perfect. You can see that OK2 changed is 0. That means there is no difference. Previously, the EC2 instance was created and now I have just variabilized the playbook and it says nothing has changed. But Abhishek, then why did you variabilize? It's very simple, right? Anyone who wants to use this playbook, if you use this standard style, they can simply go to the default mains.yaml and they can simply update it here. It is always a practice to update the variables rather than updating the code directly. It is not in Ansible, it is in every programming language. It's a standard that you should not allow the users to update the code, but you should provide them with the steps to update the variables. That's the only thing. Otherwise, anybody can come to the code and they might change something, it might break. So instead you say all the variables are in the defaults file. Just go here and update and you will get the EC2 instance of your type. Similarly, your task is to variabilize the region, variabilize the AMI ID, everything that is available here. I'm not going into it, right? You can do it just like how I have done the type. Now the next thing is, okay, Abhishek, I have variabilized this in the default mains.yaml. Then why do I have multiple other things? That's what I said. Ansible has variables places to declare. Let me show you. If I declare the same thing in the var mains.yaml, right? Let me remove this and I will define the same thing, type, and I will say t2.medium. So now I've given a conflicting information to Ansible, right? In default mains.yaml, I said, oh, my bad. Let me just remove this. So in the default main.yaml, I think I've done that mistake here as well. I shouldn't be putting the double quote. Never mind. So here I said t2.micro, and in vars main.yaml, I said t2.medium. That means I've given same variable to Ansible and I've given conflicting information. This is where variable precedence comes into picture. Now Ansible will see, okay, out of these 22 places, Abhishek has defined the same thing in role defaults and Abhishek has defined the same thing in the role variables. Okay, it's somewhere down here, the role variables. So role variables has more precedence when compared to the role defaults. That is, this one has more priority than the one that you have declared in the defaults main.yaml. Let's go to AWS here. Yeah, I have multiple tabs, sorry. And let's terminate the instance. Perfect. I have terminated the instance. And now let's give it just 1 minute. Perfect. The instance is terminated. Now let's try to execute it again. Yeah, we can get rid of this gather facts. You can just disable the gather facts in your playbook and this task will not run. Okay, it said one got changed. And now let's see if I go to the instances one more time. This is a new instance. It's pending creation, but we should see the type as T2 medium. And if we go to the previous instance, if we still have it, yeah, luckily, the type was T2.micro. So what did we understand? We understood that the precedence for vars main.yaml is more than defaults main.yaml. Abhishek, why did Ansible do this? As the name suggests, you can put your defaults here. So sometimes as a DevOps engineer, you will write the playbook.yaml and you will share it with multiple teams. So some of the teams, they might have their custom variable values. Instead of updating that directly in the default main.yaml, what they will do is they will come to the vars main.yaml and they will just have their own version of the variables. This is just another way of not updating the variables each and every time, rather than creating their own variable file. And if they use that in the vars main.yaml, everything in the defaults will get overridden. So this is one way of Ansible saying that, okay, if you have a sub project, if you have another team, your DevOps team might be sharing the Ansible playbook with all the default variables. The sub team or the developers, they can use their own vars and they can override the things. If you have done this, just like what I've done, make sure you terminate the instance, because I've just created a T2 medium one, and T2 medium is basically charged by AWS. So delete it immediately. Perfect. Now, Abhishek, are there any other places? Yes, for sure. There are multiple other places. Like this comes with the least precedence or the lowest priority. You don't have to remember all the 22 ones. You just remember what I'm going to explain. And if someone asks in the interview, you can say that I reference the Ansible official documentation. If someone asks me about the variable precedence, I don't remember all the 22 ones. I just look at the Ansible documentation and I will just reference which one has more priority than the other one. Because there is no point, you will not get any extra points if you remember these 22 things. It's almost impossible to remember. So default mains has the lowest precedence. You can see here also, it comes up in the ladder. Command line values are actually not variables. So if you ignore that, role defaults has the lowest precedence, and you can just say -e, which stands for extra vars, and you can just say type is equals to t2.micro. Let's again say t2.micro. Previously we saw vars has overridden the default ones. Now if I provide -e type t2.micro, and if you just run this one, you will see a new EC2 instance will be created. And this time again, it will be created with type T2 micro. Why? Because extra vars has the highest precedence. Okay, change this one. And if you go back to my EC2, search on the instances. Let me reload and instances. This is the new one that's in the running state. And again, it's T2 micro. Why? Because if you look at the variable precedence, extra vars has the highest precedence. So you need to remember these basic things, that defaults has the lowest precedence. So anybody can update. If you are a DevOps engineer, highly recommend that use the default mains.yaml, because you are sharing this playbook with others. It's up to them if they want to override. You will be writing a generalized playbook. You can allow others to override it. So defaults main.yaml is the place where we update the variable files, variable values, and it can be overridden by the project teams, developers through the vars main.yaml. And superpower is extra vars. Anybody using the Ansible playbook command line, they can just pass -e or -- extra vars, and it's the same. Either you can use -e or -- extra vars, and you can pass the variable. This comes with the highest precedence. It will override anything. They might have declared the variable in any of these 21 places. It will be overridden by the extra vars. So it's the superpower or highest precedence thing. Apart from that, the most common places is, you can also declare the variable here. You can just say vars and you can say type t2.micro or anything. So this is another place where you can reference a variable. And this is again a popular one because, whenever you are writing the playbook, some people also reference the variable directly. For this play, you can use the variable here. And when you write the another play, again, just provide the name and define the variables for the play, right? So you can here say name Abhishek, something like this. Either you can reference it from the ginger. My bad. Here you have to provide a value, right? So type t2.micro. It's the other way around. You should not be using ginger to templating here. Ginger 2 is used when you actually use the variable. My bad. So you can use it here. And there is one more popular place where you can use the variables, that is in the group variables. What is group variables? So in the inventory file, if you observe carefully, I have grouped the variables. Group the manage nodes, right? I have grouped this manage node as app. I might have 10 app manage nodes. I have grouped this as DB. I might have 10 DB instances. If you want to use a variable that only applies for app instance, sometimes you might have use cases where you have a variable and for app the value of the variable is different. For DB the value of the variable is different. Best example is, let's say you have password. You might have a password that is different for your app instances and different for your DB instances. In such cases, what you can do is create a folder called group vars. I created it for the Vault thing, just we created. Inside this group vars, create a file. And if you create a file called app.yaml, and inside this app.yaml or YML, if you provide any variable, like let's say password, just giving a blunt example, and if you provide a value of the password, something like this. Now, this password will only apply to the group called app inside your inventory file. So you can create another file called db.yaml, and that will only apply to the inventory files in the DB. As we move forward in the classes, we will learn about these things. You don't have to worry. So what we are going to do is we are going to use variables a lot. So I will be using variable in different places, but the important ones are these things that I've explained. Defaults main.yaml, most of the times you will be using this. Vars main.yaml, a place where developers or sub projects or sub teams, they might use this variable file to override the ones that you have written in the playbook.yaml. Groups, very, very important, because when you have a variable with value different for group of instances like app instance and DB instance, inside the group var.yaml, you will create the same password for app instance different and the DB instance different. Finally, you have extra vars, which is like a superpower, can override any of these things. If you have time, you can go through this documentation and refer what are the different other places where you can include the variables. I've also spoken about defining the variables directly inside this playbook also. Like that, we have 22 in Ansible. Don't remember everything. It's not at all important that you understand the precedence of it. But if you have time, just go through the documentation, see how it is declared in different places. That's enough. If someone asks you in the interview, you can simply tell them that, okay, if it comes to the variable precedence, this is what I'll do. I'll go to the official documentation and I'll see. But the most common places that I use is defaults, vars, inside the playbook, extra vars, and the group vars. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. And In the next classes, we will be learning about more exciting things of Ansible. See you all. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.